So Monica is our guest speaker today. Um, and she is a very acclaimed science communicator and filmmaker. So we're really excited to have her today as our guest speaker. So I'll start with, she has a short presentation and then it's going to be more discussions. I know all of you guys watched some of the videos that she produced. So hopefully we'll have tons of questions for her because those were really gorgeous videos that were, yeah, very nicely made. Okay, Monica, take it away.
Hi, nice to meet you. I am close to London, not in London, but as you can tell by my accent, I am not British. I married a British citizen. I am originally from Costa Rica, so that's the accent that you're hearing now. All right, so I'll share my screen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Let me know when you see like the photo of India, and then I'll start the presentation.
Yes.
Okay. So can you see the presentation now?
Yes, we can see the presentation.
All right. So I thought today, because I don't have a very clear idea necessarily on who I'm speaking to with regards to the level of knowledge that you might have about storytelling, science communication, how to craft hopefully more impactful messages, I thought I would just share with you a presentation that I did earlier this year at the UN Ocean Decade conference in Barcelona. They had a satellite event that was all about science communication, and they asked me to do a short talk in which I shared some of my reflections about basically what it says here. How can we better equip scientists to communicate about the ocean better? How can we tell stories of impact that are engaging to broad audiences? And share a little bit about what has worked well for me and what challenges and opportunities do I think there are. So I think today I won't be giving you like recipes on how to craft better messages, not that such a recipe even exists. I am just going to share some reflections, and hopefully that will be good food for thought for us to have a conversation. So today and throughout, I'll be sharing some photos of me at work, because I never I'm always behind the camera. So I just want to share with you a little bit of the joys and pleasures of the work that I am privileged to do. So I will talk a little bit about why storytelling is so important and how storytelling is very different from simply talking and talking. The particular challenges of science communication, in my view, what I think works when it comes down to storytelling for science, and what opportunities I see on the horizon. But before I do, I would like to share with you a personal story about how communication and storytelling can truly change behavior for the better. So this is me when I was 5, enjoying holidays at the beach with my family, and I was doing what every kid that goes to the beach wants to do, building a sand castle. But I don't think that's the image that most of the world has today of my country, Costa Rica. However, when I was 5, plastic pollution was everywhere. And in fact, for me as a kid, I thought that it was pretty convenient because all of those cups helped me like push the sand and help me build my castle more quickly. However, at some point, my country's government decided to bet on a crazy new idea. The idea that they could ramp up the country's economy by promoting this new notion of ecotourism. And so I remember vividly when I was a kid, ads running on the TV that urged Costa Ricans to pick up their trash, to stop throwing trash out of their cars' windows, basically just to clean up. And by the time that I was a teenager, Costa Rica was already being recognized as a top destination to visit nature, to reconnect with nature. Today, nobody would disagree that my country has spearheaded conservation and nature-based solutions. And this happened because of stories, because of communication. In just a few years, in my lifetime, Costa Ricans, or at least I would say most of us, changed our behavior, and our entire national identity today is intertwined with nature and with conservation. Stories did that. So this is me again at the beach, but this time when I was 20 something. And this time you don't see anything or any trash on the sand. The only thing that you see is those tiny little dots, and those are baby turtles hatching into the sunset. So it's I think for me a pretty powerful way to convey that when we use communication to organize and to trigger the right emotions in our audience, wonderful things can truly happen. And I think at the end of the day, what we are all trying to avoid at all costs is what we see on the screen. And I think we could easily apply that to many messages about science that we have been exposed to, because for some reason we tend to make science too dense, too complicated. And I get it. Science is about nuance, and the rest of us like black and white, and we like super like easy digestible bits of information, and science really doesn't work like that. But I do believe there are ways to frame science in a way that it doesn't have to become the proverbial death by PowerPoint. So the idea is to ask ourselves, how can we ignite our audience's curiosity and then retain it, and then hopefully inspire them into action. Information in science is very nuanced, as I said, it's very complex, and that might tempt us to use many, many words to try to explain something. But then we can get dangerously close to this and boring our audiences to tears. So storytelling is the antidote to that, to bore it, is the antidote so we don't bore our audiences. The audience is constantly looking for a reason to care about what we're telling them until they get tired of giving us more opportunities. So the first nugget of information that I would like you to take is that story is real life with all of the boring parts left out. This has to be my favorite quote of all times by this author, Lisa Cron, and her wonderful, wonderful book, Wired for Story. I highly recommend that book. And I really love this quote because it's so elegant and to the point. And it really tells you just how important story and storytelling has been for us as humans, and will continue to be forever for us as humans. Lisa Cron writes that the pleasure that we derive from a tale well told is nature's way of seducing us into paying attention to it. Story evolved as a way to explore our own mind and the minds of others. In other words, we're wired to turn to story to teach us the way of the world. And so a good story is way more than simply talking, because it manages to capture our attention, and it helps us make sense of the world, remember the information that we just heard through the story, and ultimately be able to share it with others. A good story enables us to find common ground with other people so we can organize and take action. Storytelling is what really made civilization possible. And as things stand right now, I really think storytelling might be the best tool that we have to keep civilization from destroying itself. And that's why I'm convinced that science communication might be one of the most important jobs out there. At the core of that job is to dare, and this is a second nugget of information, I think we need to dare to add drama and emotion to the tales that we're telling, even if they are about science. If we are managed to code scientific data with emotions, if we build a story in which emotions are the vehicle of data and information, and we are able to trigger the right emotional response in our audience, we will have nailed it. We will be able to make policymakers, community leaders, stakeholders, and everyone out there care. Emotions are indispensable, because without emotion, every option available to us would carry the same weight. If we don't assign an emotional value to information, we have no way to decide what is important and what isn't, what matters and what doesn't. This slide shows a list that I find quite useful of what emotions we should seek to trigger in our audience if we want them to overcome like a funk or a negative emotion that they are feeling. So in the face of inertia, urgency, in the face of apathy, anger, in the face of fear, hope, isolation, solidarity, and when they are self-doubting that they can make a difference, precisely let them know you can make a difference. But there are clear challenges to our mission to change the world with stories, none the least of which is that nobody really knows what we're doing when it comes down to storytelling. What we are doing is making educated guesses about what will resonate with our audiences. But as Hollywood teaches us, in storytelling, there are no guarantees. That's why some risky films sometimes pay off, such as the Blair Witch Project back in 1999. I don't know if you even could remember that, but I can, and it was like a whole thing when it came out, and apparently the budget was super limited and it was very risky, but everybody loved it. But other films which were considered a safe bet, such as Cats, for instance, absolutely flopped. So clearly there's no recipe, and none of us can say that they know 100% what we're doing when it comes down to crafting stories. So back to Lisa Cron, she says that writers often mistakenly believe that all they need to do to craft a successful story, all they need is the fire, right? The burning desire, the creative spark, the killer idea. But they forget about the second half of the equation, which is the algebra. The way I translate this quote into our conversation on science communication is that I've done this in the past, and I've seen many people do it. And it's that we can assume that because a piece of data that we want to communicate is so relevant, is so extremely important, that it should easily capture our audience's attention. But without the algebra of a narrative plot, chances are our audience are just not gonna care. They are not gonna connect. They are not gonna find it relevant to their own lives. And add to that, that certainly for you as scientists and for all of us, our careers and our daily life conditions us to develop a specialized language over time. A way, we begin developing a way of building messages and prioritizing what's important, which might ultimately make it more difficult to connect with others. Let me give you an example. When I started studying filmmaking, I spoke the same way as my sister Claudia. But a few months just a few months after I started studying filmmaking, we were watching a movie on the TV, and I said something about the camera movement that we had just seen. And she looked at me as if I was speaking a foreign language. And to this day, if she wants to make fun of me when she thinks that I'm being arrogant, she will use the word panning. Because somewhere along the line, along my training as a filmmaker, I forgot that other people were not using the same language that I was using daily. And my use of specialized language was interpreted as arrogance, even if as a joke. But my sister thought that I was being arrogant. She didn't listen, or she stopped listening to what I was saying and paid more attention to how I was saying it. And I think that scientists might be even more susceptible to this over specialization in language, precisely because of the type of work that you do. And that is one big challenge that science communication faces. On top of that, I think that scientific research turns the way we human beings normally communicate upside down. So what I mean by that is that most of us, and by us, I mean people who are not scientists, I am not a scientist. I studied communication and filmmaking, and then life took me in the direction of communication for science. So most of us prefer to start the conversation by hearing some very specific, very engaging thing that ignites our attention, sparks our curiosity, and then we're willing to go a bit deeper and a bit wider, and then deeper and deeper and deeper until we get the whole picture. But it's only through specific like stepping stones that become, so we go from the specific to the general. Whereas, as you know, scientists are told in research, are taught to first begin with the general, everything that we already know about this subject, so we can basically establish the scene, and then you begin going deeper and deeper and deeper into your field of research or the particular research that you're working on right now, which is possibly or probably the most interesting thing for the rest of us. But we first needed to wait for ages before you went through all of the generals, before you got to the good stuff. And another thing that I would urge you to remember is that story is in the specifics. Story is never in the general. All of this complexity is compounded by the fact that there is no truth anymore. Many people seem to be convinced that it is their prerogative to choose what is true to them, especially when it comes down to science. I think there's a really dangerous disconnect right now between a lot of people out there and a true understanding of how science works, how scientific knowledge is produced, and what science does for us. Besides all of the familiar difficulties that we all face going through the pandemic, I have to say COVID was particularly soul destroying for me, because I witnessed a lot of people that I considered otherwise very intelligent and reasonable fall in the traps of ridiculous conspiracy theories and misinformation. And none of the communication skills that I thought I had finessed through the years could make a dent in their arguments. And why is that? Because we are really, really complicated beings. It is science that teaches us that the human brain is more complex than any other known structure in the universe. And we're full of contradictions as a result, I guess. I, for instance, fully understand the mechanisms that keep a plane on the air and that make it by far the safest way of transportation. And still, I'm a nervous flyer. Turbulence, which is the most common and harmless experience on a flight, scares me. And I work with engineers. No matter how many stories I tell myself about flying, I still get nervous. We human beings are a very, very difficult nut to crack. So back to why we're here, about how can we tell better stories for science. I think one key step is to stop confusing professional with dry. And as I said at the beginning, to invite proper dramatic arches into scientific storytelling. Force ourselves, and this is not, I should have started by saying this, I'm not talking about how a scientist will communicate with another scientist. I understand that there's a way in which you communicate with one another, because that's how it is the mechanism that has been developed over many, many years for you to share knowledge. I get that, although I would also say scientists are also humans, so nobody wants to be bored, but that's, I guess, a topic for another day. Here I'm talking about how can scientists communicate with the rest of us. First, I think a true effort to use down-to-earth language and an informal style of communication. Then an effort to trigger the right emotion in our audience. And this means, to a certain degree, we need to know who we are talking to. Who is our audience? What do they want? What can we offer them that will engage them? We are always trying to start a conversation. It's not an academic exercise where you just, give your knowledge in an unidirectional way. You have to think about the communication that you do as the starting point of a conversation, hopefully. There are basic storytelling building blocks that I'm not gonna get into here. That would take way too long. And honestly, it's I think one reason why I also always try to motivate people to work with communicators, even just going for a coffee. It doesn't mean, having to raise the money to hire a storyteller or a filmmaker. maybe just knowing that you know somebody whose graphic design you like, or I don't know, a journalist, somebody, and saying like, would you mind if I buy you a coffee and I can walk you through something that I have in my mind, a message that I wanna convey, but I'm not finding the way. Lean on people who do this for a living, because mastery of the building blocks of storytelling takes a lifetime. And the irony of working in storytelling is that it kind of takes all of the natural out of telling stories. Like, we can go to a bar and have a beer and we can tell stories to one another and have a laugh and have a great time, and that's very natural. But once you sit down to write the script for a documentary, to write a journalistic piece, whatever, you are washing all the natural away from the story. You really begin dividing it into building blocks and experimenting. If I start with this, no, that doesn't work, let's move it. It's very mechanical, very not human in a way. I love it, but it's a weird exercise. Some of the basic storytelling building blocks are having a main character, a trigger to the action, a conflict, a clear goal. But for science communication, I don't want to overcomplicate it. I think the main takeaway is emotions. And you have to try to make your audience feel the feelings that they want to feel. So the conversation, say, around climate change is really overwhelming. And I would say 99% of the time is not making us feel the feelings that we want to feel. And I understand that it's very, very negative, but I also believe there are some stories of hope out there that maybe get a bit muted in all the noise. And at the end of the day, our audience really is looking to feel the feelings they want to feel. That's why we go to the cinema. And if you can, give your audience actionable takeaways, or lacking that, if what you're doing is not like a campaign, try to look for things that make that data that you're sharing relevant to the daily life of your audience. Why is this interesting? And that is why, to this day, we all relate gravity to Newton and an apple falling from a tree, and electricity to Benjamin Franklin and a kite. Those are simple stories that had a character, a conflict, an eureka moment, and a resolution. It has building blocks, and it's a way to spark, as I said, to spark the attention, and then make it easier to understand the science and the data, and also for our audience to memorize it and be able to share it with others. Because let's face it, science is not story. Research alone, even with its wonderful contributions and discoveries, does not constitute in itself a good story. Conflict is story. No conflict, no story. This is a quote by one of like the top experts in screenwriting, Sitfield. And what he says, all drama is conflict. Without conflict, you have no action. Without action, no character. Without character, no story. And obviously, without story, you don't have a screenplay. Basically, what he's saying is that, yes, all story is conflict, because any story is told through the eyes of a person, through the eyes of a character. But in order for us to understand what that character is made of, we need to watch their actions. And their actions are expressed by a conflict that forces them into that action. And what they decide to do shows us the personality of that character. That sounds very complicated, but is what I'm telling you about the building blocks of story. In any case, remember, conflict is story. Every now and then there's a discovery so amazing that without the aid of any narrative artifacts, it will capture our emotions, it will capture our imagination. But more times than not, we're going to have to rely on storytelling, that is conflict, to be able to keep the attention of our audience. So, where do we think we are at least in the Western world where I work, with regards to science communication, and what are the opportunities that I see? And I'm talking about science communication, not about the way people perceive science or where we find ourselves with regards to climate change. But with regards to science communication, I think we're in a good place. I think things are getting better, because I think that this is a great moment for scientific storytelling for two reasons. First, the world in general is getting so desperate about the problems we're facing that they are thirsty to learn and find solutions. Not everybody, sadly, but a lot of people. And also, in the many years that I've been working with scientists and covering expeditions, I witnessed a complete shift in how my role is perceived. When I first began going to sea, or being brought into scientific projects, it was always at the end of the project when you had a little bit spare money to try to make something cute to share with people. Or if I was on a ship, I was perceived as an accessory or even a nuisance, because uh, there was a very precious birth that was being wasted on somebody taking photos instead of being appreciated as an asset to the team. But today, especially young scientists are really, really attuned to the power of entertaining and to the power of story, and are quite natural, I have to say, at crafting good stories. I guess that's the beauty of social media, right? And of communication becoming more democratic, and everybody has a camera in their hand. And I love it. I'm all for it. And I think now I am brought into scientific teams way earlier in the process. So I really feel there is also there's a thirst in the audience, but also in the scientists to try to convey what they are doing in a way that more people can understand it. Um, so where can we start? Again, to Lisa Cron, she suggests that writers who cannot sum up the story they are telling in a clearly focused, intriguing sentence or two probably haven't written a clearly focused, intriguing story. So perhaps when you face yourselves with the creation of a story, that's a good place to start. Try to sum it up in one sentence, a good one, and take it from there. So I sent before a few links to some videos that I have made, and I chose these ones on purpose because these were not created in luxurious contexts. These were created within the constraints and limitations that we all work when we are working in science. Like, I am very familiar with the difficulties of writing grants and raising money to keep your lab going, to fund your research, et cetera, et cetera. And it's no different than when an institution is trying to create content to share that science. Sadly, the resources are always super limited. So these first two videos, or three videos, I think, were made while I was on board, with very little internet access, with very limited access to the time that the scientists have on board, because these are scientists who have been waiting for years for 3 precious weeks on a research vessel to do the research. So as much as they would like to engage with me, also they have very limited time. It's only me. I don't have the luxury of having a team. And it's a really, really fast turnaround where the Institute expects me to be sending some sort of quality product for them to share. So not ideal. And this is precisely why I am sharing these ones, because I think it's better to share some examples that are more realistic than the more rare and luxurious moments where you have a healthier budget, a crew to work with, time to prepare, etc., etc. So I'm not sure if you watched them all, but I'm going to assume that you did. And so this one was the one where this scientist is telling us all about mud deep in the Pescadero Basin in Baja California in Mexico. Um, and remember how I said before in the presentation, make the audience feel the feelings that they want to feel. So the first one would be try to make them feel entertained. And in this case, we were towards the end of the expedition. I had already become more familiar with the personality of the scientists. I always come on board not knowing a single person. The crew I do know, but not the scientists that are going to take part in the expedition. And I'm a very introverted person, which is not great for the type of work that I do. So it takes me a little while to really get to know the people. And anyway, John was an extremely funny, nice guy. And we, by the end of the expedition, have all been making fun of him because while everybody else was doing super exciting stuff, looking at like the animals in the hydrothermal vents or whatever, or doing more glamorous stuff, he spent his days in the wet lab working with all of the mud that was collected. And at the end, I decided to capitalize on what I found I found him really charismatic with how funny he was and how much self-deprecation almost he had about his passion for mud. And I thought, well, it's a good feeling to project, like just comedy in science, and the less, not everybody can be Cousteau, right? So yeah, so we made this short video, and we used humor as the emotion to share why mud is really, really important when you're studying an ecosystem like this one in Baja California. Then we have another short video made in the same conditions, right, under pressure. And so this one is Verena Tunnicliffe. I don't know if you've heard of her. I had never heard of her until I met her. But as soon as I met her, at least for the Canadian contingent of scientists, she is an institution like as loved and revered as Sylvia Earle. And such a lovely, lovely person, but I think also with no time to waste, and so I was personally very intimidated by her, and this really took a lot from me to produce this video with her. But I thought, because so much has already been produced about her and she has given so many interviews, but I have her captured here on this ship, maybe I can try to have a longer conversation with her that somehow I managed to make ever so slightly more personal. And I wanted to, because she's been around for a while, so I already know that when she got started as a woman, it wasn't the same as today. But I didn't want to make the video, I didn't want that to be the central point or emotion of the video, because I just feel anyway, that's my personal thing, but I feel that it's a really important conversation to have. But at the same time, if you make it the center, you almost take away from the amazing science that she was doing at that point on board, and it could turn off a bit of the part of the audience that would be like, not this again. So we do talk about that, but in a very natural way, I think. And the way she said that she wanted to be an astronaut when she was little, and her father told her there are no female astronauts, no, that you cannot be a female astronaut. And she was like, okay. So I decided to become the next best thing, which was a deep sea scientist. And then she says, and actually I ended up doing the best thing because this is amazing and I love it and blah blah blah. So we just give tribute to the fact that of the female struggle, of course, but I just try to make it more about her incredible resilience, the amazing science she's leading, and just also the passion that it takes to be a scientist for so long. And so anyway, and through those emotions, we share a bit of the actual science that she was doing on board at that time. This is a completely different video I was hired by the University of Southampton here to promote their civil, maritime, and environmental engineer department and try to invite students to pursue those programs. Not a lot of money at all. And all they wanted was something that was punchy and exciting. And so I just decided to lean on the emotions that stomp music makes me feel. I love I'm gonna forget that word, but like the percussion and the rhythm that it has. And we love to say in this in storytelling or in filmmaking that sound is the only thing that you can put in a film that is actually physically going to touch your audience, because of the sound waves actually touching your audience's ears or inner ear. And so I didn't have much to work with, so I decided that some sort of emotion triggered by the music needed to be the driver. So I edited a lot of stock video because there wasn't, again, any budget to film anything, with a nice mixture of music, and just basically try to convey that professional doesn't need to be stiff and boring. And that was they were quite happy at the end with that one. And then again, back to the ship, because it's just a lot of pressure to work on those expeditions. And so this one was, I have to send weekly updates, video updates of what's going on in the expeditions. And in this particular one, the scientists were trying to test, or were testing, a new way of working to find hydrothermal vents in the deep sea, which is a process that normally would take weeks if it works, if you find them. You could be literally sailing meters away from a hydrothermal vent and miss it. But the work that they developed, or the strategy that they developed, made it so easy that we were finding new hydrothermal vent fields or chimneys every single day. It almost became too easy. And so the team was really doing something for the first time. They were like true explorers and discoverers, thanks to this approach. And so I decided to use a combination of candid moments where the first moment that we were in the mission control room and the ROV goes from the dark to poof, a hydrothermal vent, and then like they went crazy and everybody's screaming and so excited. So use those candid moments with like a punchy music and animation to convey how fast and intense this mission was, and just kind of reconnect with what used to be, I think, what most of us felt like when we heard about scientists, explorers, and you just wanted to know what they were doing and what they were discovering, and everything was amazing. And this was a good opportunity to go back to those good feelings. And finally, this one, a totally different one. And this is a very institutional video. And what I mean by that is that you have a client, as it often happens, that wants to say everything there is to be said under the sun about this thing in 4 minutes or less. And that's really difficult. There's no way to build a proper narrative arch if you don't become heartless and begin chopping off the boring parts, because story is life without the boring parts. But people love their data, people love their projects, so they want to say everything there is to say about the project. So basically, we just try to make the visuals, the music, and the shots, the images themselves, as human as possible. Make the women in the island the visually the center of it, because this project was truly transforming their life and almost the social dynamics in the island, which made me very happy. And to showcase the people that were benefiting directly from the project. So sometimes it's difficult, again, to advise a client in how to prioritize what makes it into the story and what doesn't. And when that challenge arises and they are paying me, and at the end, the client is always right, at least we tried visually to make it about someone and some emotion. Um, I also wanted to leave you with some examples of what I consider to be wonderful storytelling. And I think that by listening to these podcasts or reading the books of Bill Bryson, you really begin seeing much better practical examples of what a good story. How can you? I mean, Bill Bryson invests, like, he has an army of researchers and invests years and years into one book. So again, context. But when you read his books explaining how the human body works or the history of science, is he makes every single paragraph about a person or an event. It is not abstract um, rambling. It's really specific. Remember, stories in the specifics. Throughline is an NPR podcast that I'm obsessed with, and they talk about history. But again, the way they tell you a specific historical event is just wonderful. And Radiolab, which I'm sure you've heard about, and it's amazing. Thank you. And that's my email. I'm here for whenever you need me for whatever reason. I love to keep conversations going. And yeah, thank you.
I'll turn my screen so that you can kind of see people. And we can have a little bit of a discussion. And we can ask you questions. And pick your brain about lots of different things. That was a really great presentation. And I love kind of the ending of that, as you're continually still working with even people here, given that you're working with Laura, which is exciting. Okay. I'll start with like one big question, but then jump in. You touched on some of this in your pictures and things at the beginning. I mean, I was wondering, Monica, if you could talk a little bit more about your timeline in like history in terms of how you got into science communication and filmmaking. Like what drew you that direction, and what kind of got you there? It feels like you can become a science communicator from so many different angles. And I feel like it's really helpful to kind of hear more about people's backgrounds.
Yeah, so on the ship, now they have more people, but for a long time I was like the main person that they would bring on board to cover these expeditions. And then they found this other guy from Scotland who I love. We have become excellent friends. But he's a scientist. He was trained, I think, as a biologist, but then he takes the most breathtaking photos, and he just has such a this he's just so good. I mean, he puts me to shame, honestly. He's amazing at what he does, but he was trained as a scientist, and then because of his love of photography and film, actually became a science communicator. I come from the completely other side of the street, which is I studied filmmaking, and then I wish I had a super inspiring story that I always knew that this is what I wanted to do, but I basically just stumbled upon the most amazing career. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but the point being that I think, like with everything, there's pros and cons. He had, because he's been trained in science, might sometimes miss a little bit what things don't normal people know. Like, he makes assumptions about what's the baseline of the knowledge of the audience that many times I find is a bit too, it's beyond what normal people know. Whereas when I walk into a scientific challenge, I begin asking really, really basic questions. And I always first apologize. I always start by saying, look, I'm not a scientist. I'm going to ask you questions that will drive you insane on how basic they are. But these are the questions that any normal person out there would be asking you. And so, but by the same token, I might miss some other interesting implications because I don't have scientific training. I don't know if that makes sense. So from wherever you approach this, because of your own background, there will be things that to win and things to lose. And that's why I also always I love it when you have the privilege of being able to work with a crew, not just me with my camera, my microphone running around like a crazy person, but when you can actually have a team that you work with and everybody benefits from everybody's background. And how I just always knew that I wanted to work in stories. That's the only thing that I knew. I loved. I would write little fairy tales when I was a kid, and my teacher would read them to the classroom, and that was great. And so I thought that I wanted to be a journalist because for me that was like I didn't know that filmmaking was even an option. But then I remember hearing and hearing and hearing that when you're a journalist, you have to try to be objective. And I always have felt that that is just not true, not possible, just a complete load of fill in the blanks. And so I was like, no, I mean, like, I'm not going to pretend. Obviously, you're making choices, and choices are never objective. So, but then along came the world of documentaries, and I was like, I want to do that. And so, luckily, I was able to study that. And my second choice for a career that, was biology. And so I had a lot of biology friends and scientist friends. And then some, I don't know, I just started working in the channel of the university, and in a little program that covered environment in Costa Rica. And there you begin just meeting more scientists and more people that work in this. And when they need somebody, they don't know anyone that works in communication but you. So you show up, you try to do a good job, and then they call you for the next thing. And one thing led to the other, but it was never clear to me that I wanted to end up being a science communicator. It just happened, and I'm so happy that it did. I many times see young people nowadays that have a much I literally honestly just stumbled upon things, whereas I see young people nowadays like, yeah, this university has an interesting program in this, and this is the teacher that is teaching it, and I think they are amazing. And the level of research that they put in, the stepping stones that they want to take to get somewhere, I admire them. I was absolutely clueless, and all I did was show up and try to do a good job, and it has paid out so far.
Awesome. Do other people have questions?
I have one actually.
Yeah.
I was sort of wondering, do you kind of I guess it depends from project to project, but if you have a project where you're like not interviewing someone, I know you're talking about like using their personality to sort of set the tone. Do you come in sort of like with an idea of what kind of tone, like what kind of angle of emotion you want to tell about like a story, if you're not focusing on like a specific person, but rather like a broad subject?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when you're doing science communication, I would say 99% of the time it's a broad subject that they bring to you, and they just want to do a video or a, whatever type of communication product about it. Ideally, you will have time. Ideally, you could go through iterations, even evaluate it, come back and finesse the product. That is very rarely the case. So I just try to ask as many questions as I can about the audience, because at the end of the day, there's no such thing as the general public. You always should be talking. You can have primary, secondary, tertiary audiences that you would like to hit, but you really want to try to have a somebody in your mind that you're talking to, and say that they say, well, is a female conservative, over 65, that have 3 kids and are middle class, whatever, and you don't know anybody like that, or you don't really, or you struggle to put yourself in their shoes. If you can again buy somebody like that a coffee and get in their heads, that's amazing. Or do your research online, ask AI to describe to you what a person like this normally thinks like, but it's always very, very important to, so I lean on that, on trying to come up with somebody that I'm talking to, then ask myself in that Venn diagram. So my client wants them to learn this. And they probably, when it comes down to, I don't know, what could it be, to clean air, I don't know. And they care about knowing that the place that they live in is safe. There is safe to breathe. And so where is this place where what they want from life and what my client wants them to learn kind of intersect? And that's where the conversation needs to happen. And it's a conversation again, even if nobody ever contacts my client, but you have to think about it as a conversation starter, not as a let's bore them to tears with everything there is to know about this subject. The other thing that I lean on always is the first time I sit with a client and they begin telling me about what it is that they want to talk about and my own emotions and what it makes me feel. And because science is exciting, science is not story, but it is exciting and it is important. And so the first things that it makes me feel about whatever it is that they want me to talk about, I try to explore that as well and not forget that first feeling, to try to capture it in what I do.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
I have a question. You kind of mentioned that you kind of mentioned that some you've been hired by a client, or you end up in a situation where you're like making a doc communicate, but the people kind of see you as a nuisance there. How do you like add emotion to what you're doing if the people there kind of like have a low interest in like communicating to the public, or are kind of like, yeah, this is what I do, and they're excited about it, but like in their own way and not in a way that would be easy for other people to understand?
Yeah, that's difficult, especially at the beginning. As I mentioned, I'm an introvert, so I hate breaking the ice. It's physically painful for me to have to break the ice. But that's what they pay me for, so I have to do it. But normally, especially in the context, like if I'm already put in a situation where whether they like it or not, I'm there to tell the story about what they are doing. Nowadays, there's gonna be at least one that is excited about sharing it. And so that's where I'm going to start. And then I give grace to people in the sense that, yeah, you're busy. I get it. You haven't slept. If you're the principal investigator of an expedition, you're not sleeping. You have way better problems than, sitting down for an interview with me. But after a while, I try to make my interactions with them, how to say it, respectful, in the way that they feel that even though I'm asking very basic questions, that I am truly interested in what they are doing. And as I said, even scientists are humans, so they like to share that excitement, because they are doing it because they are excited, even though they have forgotten how to express those emotions. So you have to dig, and you will find the human in there at some point.
I have a similar question. How do you usually approach interviews with people? Like, do you have usually very limited time and you're just trying to like go really quickly, or do you slowly ease people? Because I feel like probably a lot of scientists are also not probably used to being on camera. So like, do you have a way to make people feel comfortable? And do you go in at all knowing what they're going to say or what you want them to say? And do you have like very targeted questions, or do you try to just like keep things very broad to then find the story kind of afterwards?
Yes. Yeah, you never go what was there was a very good saying about this, but I will forget it. Yeah, you don't go to war without a plan. Obviously, the plan is never going to be followed, but you need to go into an interview knowing what are the sound bites that you want to get from that interview. I normally already have a plan, a very, we call it like the skeleton of the story, like the structure underneath the story. So I already know that at some point I need somebody to mention this thing, and then somebody will mention this other thing. And I'm hunting constantly for those things. So I have like broad things that I want to touch on. People are busy, so I do keep my interviews nice and short. To make them feel more at ease, I normally just begin by explaining them what's going to happen, and I just say they always ask, am I looking at you or am I looking at the camera? And that just tells me that they are super nervous. If you tell them that to look at the camera, that's it, they will freeze. And so I tell them, no, there's no camera. The camera is always behind me over my shoulder. So it kind of looks like, never looks like they are looking at the camera, which would be weird in any way, I think, for a documentary. But at least to the audience, it will look a bit warmer than if they were looking in that direction. But I tell them, no, this is a conversation between us. I'm not going to take too much of your time. If you're uncomfortable with how you phrased somebody, just let me know. When I edit this, before it goes out, you'll watch it. If you're not happy with how it looks, you can tell me, blah, blah, blah. So that kind of like, and then I always obviously start with very general questions that I know I'm probably not going to use, but it's just warming them up. And then I go into the more specific hunt of what I want to get from them. I don't know. I don't think, again, there's no recipe for this type of thing. Is weirdly one of the things that I feel most comfortable doing in my job. I love interviewing.
When you have when you have a subject who doesn't quite have a message that they know they want to get across, or they're struggling to think of one or trying to articulate it, do you have any like one option I notice is that you can always kind of focus on the importance of their scientific question, whatever it is, like okay, like the mud, John Magyar with his mud. It's like, okay, it turns out mud is complex and interesting, and there's all these different components of it, and that's kind of the emotional reach out to the audience. Are there any other kinds of strategies that you can think of? Maybe ones that involve like the actual conclusions of the research, like, or any tips that you have for that, like articulating or discovering a message in someone's work?
Yeah, super good question. Talking about the results of research is like a unicorn. I mean, that has never happened to me in my life. Is there ever an end to research? I ask. Like, no. And also these expeditions, if we're gonna just talk about the expeditions, they are going there to gather data. The actual processing, and it takes them years after they get off the ship to. I would love one day to be able to follow an expedition from the moment they were writing the grant to when they went on board to basically when they get the Nobel Prize, but I don't think it's going to be. I am working right now on a short documentary for about ocean acidification, and that is very difficult because it's very abstract, it's invisible, it's not a one thing, it's something that can be happening, and then in a few months it's gone because of all of the other variables around the water where it's happening, and well, I mean, I'm still learning about it. And they basically just came to me with this very abstract desire to communicate to the general public, which is my favorite thing to hear, what it is, why we should care, why we need to organize, why we need to invest more in research, blah, blah, blah. And so that's to like communities who are going to be affected, policymakers, other scientists that even in the scientific community are not taking this as seriously as the OA scientists would like. And that to me was a really big challenge. So what I did was ask, well, but are we, okay, it's very abstract, fine, but are we actually seeing effects, like tangible effects of it in anything right now that are actually affecting human beings? Or is this something that we know is going to happen in the future? And that got us to talk about like native tribes in Washington state that are very dependent on their oyster fisheries and other shellfish, and they really have begun seeing effects. They actually had gotten organized and have, now I think Washington state is one of the first places where the environmental policy of the place considers ocean acidification, and the tribes have become the stewards of, anyway. So that's the story. But I needed to try to, because the story is not ocean acidification. Nobody wants to hear about it. The story is about this guy who one day woke up in the morning, opened, the door to the aquaculture place, and began thinking that the shells were looking funny. And for 2 years straight, they lost the complete crop, and they were like, what's gonna happen? And then they figured out that it was this weird thing, ocean acidification. So that's the story. So I think I'm taking a long time to not give you an answer.
You did, yeah.
You basically just ask questions until you hit something that you think could work.
Yeah. Cool, thank you.
No, my pleasure.
I have sort of a follow-up question about when you hear the general public, like how do you start thinking about who the more specific audience would be? And I'm sure that's kind of related to what you were saying, but I was just wondering if you could talk more about that.
Yeah, so for instance, for that last video that I showed for Conservation International and Swarovski, it was a general audience. But then you just ask more questions about, at the end of the day, what is your objective with this video? What do you want to get? Why are you calling me to make this video? And in this case is, well, it's the end of a project and we need to prove what we have done with the money that the donors have given us for this. And also the donor wants to look good and to be like, oh, look at the amazing things that we are funding. And so, okay, yes, you say the general public because you're going to post it on social media and try to get some likes. Yes, that's everybody. But truly what you want is to make your donor feel good so they give you more money. No? And so at that point, I know that the audience is first the donor, and second, the NGO itself. They are creating a video for themselves to feel that they can sell themselves to the donor, Do I tell them necessarily? No. I mean, I don't necessarily tell them that this is the person that I'm making the video for. Although I don't think they would have said no. I think they would have been like, yeah, actually, it's for the donor. But that's it. I just ask more questions, and they can tell me general audience as much as they want. I am going to make it for a specific person.
I actually have one more question. Kind of going off of like your time at sea and like filming scientists sort of in their environment. When you have such limited time and resources, how do you like approach the I guess gathering the film? Do you like to usually interview them beforehand and then you get an idea of like what types of shots you need, or do you kind of do it simultaneously, or do you do like the shots first and then see how it fits into the interview? Like, what's the process there?
Yeah, there's no process. It's all chaos. Non-stop chaos. For as long, like I'm at the end of this month, I'm flying to Chile and we're gonna be there for 3 months, 3 expeditions in a row. I'm going to die literally, like I am gonna be a corpse by the time they. No, I shouldn't joke about that. But it's gonna be intense. 3 months straight. It's chaos all the time, but the way I do it is I am shooting and photos and film at all times. I try to understand at the beginning. Every day begins with a bridge meeting where the crew and the heads of departments meet to discuss the operations of the day. So I'm there and I already know, okay, so more or less the plan always changes, but more or less today this is what they aim to do. So I already know a few key moments where I should be there. And I'm filming during the lunchtime, dinner time in the mess room. I'm trying to sit always next to somebody different to have candid conversations, like not necessarily only about the science, although during an expedition, it's very difficult for them to talk about anything else. And then I'm just sitting there listening to them and reacting to it. But like, by reacting, I mean, what does that make me feel? Do I feel that's like, ooh, wow, that was interesting. I'll ask a question about that, or whatever. No, none of these else, whatever. Let's move into something more juicy. And then I know when the weekend is approaching, which is the moment where I need to sell a whole package of, a film and photographs retouched and everything. So I have to know that by day, say Thursday, I have to have a plan of the video. And normally what I do is I think these 2-3 people I've heard talk really well about this thing. So I just go and ask them if they would give me I have this idea for this video, and I was thinking that you would be really great to explain this and this to me. Would you have time? Would you be interested? Thank you so much. Or maybe sometimes they say, yeah, but you know what? Actually, this other person that I hadn't considered is even better, and so when I'm not interviewing, I'm filming like crazy, or I'm sitting in front of the computer sorting through the footage and trying to organize it. And then once I have my interviews, I transcribe them, pick up the best parts, again, to building blocks, try to get those bits and pieces in some sort of order where I feel, okay, I have a story now, because I never use voiceover. It's always just the voices of the interviews carrying the story. And then once I have that, I can assess if the footage that I've been filming is enough to sustain the story, or I go and hunt for the extra footage that I need.
Do you have to make a video every week and then at the end you have a number of like the like small or personal videos as well? Or those like extra additional ones? Or like, yeah, what is you? I'm just curious because that sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah. No, it's one video per week, which is an update video about what's going on in the expedition, and one personal video. So it's 2
wow.
videos per week, plus every day they want 10 high quality photographs retouched about the things that went on. Yeah, so that's why I'm going to be either a lot fatter or a lot thinner when I get if I don't know.
Wow.
Can I ask, you said you keep asking questions until you hit something interesting. You said that in the response to the question a few minutes ago, and we're all making little documentaries ourselves. I think, at least for myself, the challenge is what's interesting about what I do. So when we're doing things about ourselves, how do we figure out what's actually interesting?
Oh, I love it. I think if I were you, I would go and talk to somebody that doesn't have any idea what you're doing, and ask them to ask you questions. Because you have forgotten what the rest of us mortals out there ignore about what you do. And by the reactions when you explain to them, you will know what is more, what is a better hook to use.
Awesome. You also said that you don't use voiceover, is that because it's just not as effective as actually having the
I think
voice?
I love voiceover. I think it's a stylistic choice. I think documentary went through a period where you couldn't conceive it without a voiceover. And I mean, still like the blue chip documentaries, right? March of the Penguins and all of that, of course, you need you need voiceover. But I really, really love documentaries where it's the if I feel now, and this might change, in excellent that it changes, but right now I feel that if what your protagonists are telling you carries the story, then why are you gonna like meddle farther? And if you manage to do good interviews where they give you emotion when they are talking, then why mess with that? I also, in a very like completely honest way, try to give my clients less things to correct, because every correction that a client does is more work for me. And that type of environment, I kid you not, when they send me edits to a video, I want to cry and kill them, because you have so many other things to do, and then they are like, it's a lovely video, but I would like, it's like, just take it. So if on top of that I'm writing a voiceover and sending it for their consideration, I am creating more work for me, and no, I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah.
You choose background music. And I think the videos that you sent, that we all watched today were a really interesting mix of different things. Like the mud one actually had lyrics in there, which I thought was an interesting choice. That isn't something that I think happens often, which is why I was like very curious to get your input. Beyond, I'm assuming it's mostly emotion and pace, but yeah, the lyrics and some other things I thought were very interesting.
Yeah, I almost never use music with lyrics. It just happened that it's all stock music, right? So I have access to certain databases of stock music. In a perfect world, you will have a musician that you work with, and that it's impossible to top that experience when you actually sit again collaborating with other people and saying, this is the part where people should be like shocked, and this is the part and then the musician, because again, that's the only thing that you can give your audience that physically touches them. And it is really a very visceral reaction that we have to music. And so it's very, I'm sure you've seen it many times, but it's so underestimated that when they edit something and then they just paste elevator music behind it, and because why? Because we have to have music. Whereas you could consider it, sorry for that noise, is my dog being excited because he's going to eat. I don't know if you hear it. Anyway, he's very happy behind that door. So yeah, I look for the music that has what I feel is the right rhythm and emotion in it to support what I'm trying to anyways deliver. In the case of that one that had lyrics, I don't even know that I was even, I don't think I even worried about what the lyrics were saying. I just like that by accident, when in my editing there was a pause, you had a little bit of the voice. It was never over the voice of the interviewee. It was almost by accident. Of course, I had to like kind of correct it, but I liked the flavor that it would bring, because the way the person was singing was also like, I just like the feeling of it. And I sent it to the institute, and I was like, and I can hear them saying that that's not gonna work, but they went for it. So every now and then a miracle happens.
Can I ask about a shot that you took on the ship where I think you're looking up? It's somehow the camera is angled up at either a counter, or maybe it's in a lab, but I was wondering how you got that shot.
Without seeing the shot, I can't tell you how I got it. Ships are very small places. I mean, they make it as comfortable as they can, but obviously they are very contained little spaces. So I just twist into little squares and try to get myself, like wedge myself wherever I can. And many times I just record and get the camera in there and pray that whatever the camera is filming will work. And I just switch the position a little bit for a while, and then I go over it, and sometimes it works.
Thank you.
When you are filming, do you actively think of trying to build scenes and have shots at like different like depths? When you're saying you're running around and getting lots of footage, are you trying to like sit in one place, have things film afar, up close, kind of move it around many places and then go somewhere else? Or like, how do you actively try to like build scenes by getting a variety of shots?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think because I have the unlucky but lucky situation of having to edit my own footage, I think as an editor, you begin really understanding what you need, what are the minimum requirements to have good rhythm in the editing of a scene. So for sure, if I'm in the mission control room, I know I'm gonna get the close-up of the face of the scientist directing the dive, the over the shoulder with the screens, the hand moving the camera, a wide shot of all of the other scientists behind them. So yes, it's always an array of different shots. And then I know I'm going to use that to try to explain visually to the audience what it is like to be inside that room. I'm going to also want to have a few close-ups of reactions of the other scientists or the ROV pilots about what's going on. And I try to be extremely practical about it, because sometimes I know that there is something exciting going on, but I also know that I already have the footage I need of reactions and happiness and smiles, and I have it. And I might be tempted to go again because I know that there's also something, and it's a risk that I have to take because there's such limits on time, that once I know I have something good, I just use my time for something else, whether that's an interview, going through the footage and sorting it, or sleeping, because the reality is that, fatigue on a ship is a real danger and it's a real thing. So I also need to manage my time very wisely. And I am an island, like every other person on the ship works within a team, and they will have teammates that can be like, you don't look right today. Are you sure you're getting your rest hours? Things like that. I am an island. Nobody knows what I'm doing. I call my own shots. So I have to also take care of myself. So the moment I know I have the number of shots that I think I need to build a scene, and also the number of candid moments in the scientists, then I walk away from that situation, no matter the temptation, and I use my time for something else.
Any final burning questions, given that this has been, already a nice long interview, and I appreciate this so much, Monica.
It's my pleasure.
Awesome. So one final burning question. Okay. Sounds great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate this. It was really great to get the input of someone who is not just a filmmaker, but a science communicator and filmmaker. So does things very similar. And so it's great to, get your input. Appreciate
No,
it.
I'm really glad. Thank you. I hope it's useful. And I left you there with my email, and I mean it. If ever, you're working on your documentaries, you want me to take a look or whatever, I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.